There are a lot of interesting what-if scenarios when it comes to The Lord of the Rings, where if even minor events had gone differently, the whole story changes. So today, let's talk about how the story would change if a major event had gone differently. What if Saruman won the Battle of the Hornburg? First, we have to lay out the scenario. Everything in the story up until the Battle of the Hornburg stays the same, no differences whatsoever, but during the actual battle there will be a singular major difference. Instead of failing the assault and being routed by the defenders, Isengard's army successfully overwhelms the fortress, and by dawn, all of the defenders have been killed or captured. When Gandalf and Erkenbrand arrive at dawn, they see that the fortress has already fallen, so they retreat back into the hills. Saruman has won a major, decisive victory at the Battle of the Hornburg. So what happens next? With Helm's Deep fallen, Rohan has been dealt a major blow. King Theoden is dead, as is his heir, Eomer, and 2,000 of Rohan's soldiers, amongst them some of the finest warriors from Edoras, have also been killed or captured. Rather importantly, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli have all been killed as well. So where does Saruman go from here? Does his war machine go into overdrive and complete the conquest of Rohan, or does he consolidate and perhaps offer surrender terms? Well, it might surprise you to hear that even if Saruman won at Helm's Deep, he's still in a bad position. You see, regardless of the result at Helm's Deep, Isengard still gets destroyed by the Ents. This is because the destruction of Isengard actually occurs the night and morning before the actual Battle of the Hornburg. What this means is that even while Isengard's forces are hoisting the White Hand over the Hornburg, Saruman is looking down in horror as his forges and industry are laid to waste by the diverted waters of the River Isen. Now, if you didn't know this, don't feel bad. The Peter Jackson films make it seem like the events happened the same night, and in the actual Two Towers books, the details of what happens at Isengard isn't revealed to the reader until 2 chapters after the Helm's Deep chapter, so it's easy to get confused over the timeline. Furthermore, Isengard's army at Helm's Deep finds a new problem on their doorstep come the dawn, the Huorns. Yes, a sea of angry hostile trees has blocked the way out of the Deeping Combe, meaning that the Isengarders are trapped in Helm's Deep unless they choose to brave the foothills above the valley. The issue, these hills are still filled by 1,000 desperate Rohirrim led by Gandalf and Erkenbrand, so if the Isengarders choose this way, they have to be very cautious if they wish to avoid being ambushed. Alright, so we've got a decent picture of Isengard's situation. What about Rohan's? With Theoden and Eomer dead, the rule of Rohan would technically pass to Eowyn, who remained behind in Edoras. Rohan's chief military leader at this point would be Elfhelm, who was already retreating towards Edoras with 400 horsemen. Once it becomes clear that he is now the most senior commander, he would likely order a full muster of Rohan's other regions. Remember, thousands of Rohan's warriors still haven't been properly mustered yet, so with Isengard's army trapped in Helm's Deep for the time being, a proper defense of the rest of Rohan could still be organised. It is bleak for Rohan, but not hopeless given that Isengard has been destroyed and its army has been cut off. But this goes further than Isengard and Rohan. I mentioned earlier that Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli have been killed. This has huge ramifications for the rest of the war. It means there is no parley with Saruman at the steps of Orthanc, and that means the Palantir remains with Saruman. This means that Pippin does not reveal himself to Sauron, and it also means that Aragorn doesn't either, on account of being dead. It's necessary to point out just how important this sequence of events was. In the space of a single day, Sauron first assumed that Saruman had the One Ring, and then he assumed Aragorn had the One Ring. Both Gandalf and Aragorn believed that this spooked Sauron into bringing forward the date of his assault, and in the actual timeline, Sauron would order the Morgul host to set forth a mere 5 days later. This army, whilst large, was not overwhelming in size and was destroyed by the combined forces of Gondor and Rohan. But without Aragorn using the Palantir, Sauron does not have a reason to bring forward his assault, assuming that's what he actually did. We don't know for certain as we never get the story from his perspective. Let's assume Aragorn and Gandalf were correct, so strap in because this could cause all sorts of wacky scenarios. Let's go to our first scenario. Sauron delays his attack. Now if Sauron chooses to delay his attack by even a week, the odds become better and better for the Free Peoples because every day Sauron delays means Frodo gets closer to Mount Doom without Gondor having been invaded. If Frodo gets captured and the One Ring taken, we know what happens. Sauron wins, no ifs, no buts. But if Frodo manages to reach Mount Doom before Sauron has even attacked, we get an outcome where Sauron and his dominions are destroyed and Gondor remains at its full strength. This is a catastrophic outcome for Saruman. If Mordor is destroyed without even firing a shot, Gondor can mop up what resistance is left, secure its borders, and then turn its gaze squarely towards Isengard. Now, even with his base of operations up and running, Saruman would not be able to take Gondor in a straight fight. And in this scenario, Saruman doesn't even have that. He's at Gondor's mercy, and when a Gondorian army arrives in Rohan to aid its ally, Saruman can kiss his ass goodbye. He can haul up an Orthanc, but his power is effectively at an end. This is a rather bittersweet scenario though. Sweet because Gondor doesn't really get invaded, avoiding all that death and destruction. Bitter because with Aragorn dead, there is no king, and likely no reunited kingdom. Denethor remains the steward of Gondor and gets to live his last few years without the threat of Sauron, and Eowyn will probably become the first queen of Rohan. But what about our second scenario, and trust me, this one is even weirder. Let's assume everything happens roughly the same. Maybe Sauron doesn't delay his assault, or only delays it by a few days. In this scenario, everything pretty much stays the same to begin with, except without the Rohirrim and without Aragorn and his southern soldiers, Minas Tirith falls and Gondor's leadership is decapitated, much like Rohan's. Denethor is dead, Faramir is dead, Imrahil is dead, and so are many other of Gondor's lords. With Minas Tirith captured, Gondor's heartland and Rohan's east are wide open to invasion, and Sauron can now complete the conquest of Gondor or launch his own attacks on Rohan at his leisure. Now, contrary to what many people might believe, this doesn't exactly help Saruman's position either. Although Saruman and Sauron were allies in the war effort, Saruman was actively betraying Sauron in order to get the One Ring for himself, and Sauron was very much aware of this. In the actual timeline, it's revealed that Sauron wants his own lieutenant installed in Isengard, someone more trustworthy like the Mouth of Sauron. There's no reason to believe that Sauron's view of this would change even if Saruman had victory at Helm's Deep, so after mopping up Gondor and Rohan, it's likely Sauron would then relieve Saruman of his position too. From then on, Sauron systematically conquers the rest of Middle-earth and everything is bad forever. However, this scenario wouldn't be set in stone either, because there's still one more important factor: the One Ring. The One Ring is the wild card here, and even if Sauron takes Minas Tirith, he isn't safe from a pair of hobbits who are gradually making their way to Mount Doom. If they are captured and the One Ring taken, then we know what happens: Sauron wins. But if Frodo and Sam make it to Mount Doom and manage to destroy the One Ring, we enter perhaps the most chaotic timeline. If the One Ring is destroyed, so is Sauron, and this has a catastrophic effect on the forces of Mordor. No one else has the willpower to hold all of these armies together. No, not the Witch King and the Nazgul, because they would perish with the destruction of the One Ring. At Minas Tirith, where the Morgul army is encamped, there would be mass mutinies, desertations, conflict between factions. Some of Sauron's higher-ranking leaders might be able to hold remnants of these forces together, but make no mistake, Sauron's dominion would rapidly collapse. Instead of organised armies, we'd get many fleeing back to their homes or whatever dark holes will house them, and those soldiers that remain would resort to looting, burning, pillaging, and fighting each other. So what are we left with? A Mordor that is rapidly disintegrating, Gondor and Rohan which have both been invaded and their leaderships destroyed, and Isengard which has its forces intact but its main base of operations has been invaded and occupied. It becomes a game of last man standing. This is a power vacuum where Saruman could actually thrive. Gondor and Rohan are stuck on the defensive, and although Sauron's armies have likely dispersed or are leaderless, the manpower and industry is still there to be taken advantage of. If he uses the power of his voice to secure safe passage from Isengard, Saruman could potentially get to his own army trapped in Helm's Deep and lead it to Mordor, where he could establish a new base of operations and regather some of Sauron's old forces. Basically, Saruman could take Sauron's place. And although Saruman wouldn't be as powerful or as effective as Sauron, he doesn't necessarily need to be because Gondor and Rohan have already been weakened. In saying that, it's not a guaranteed victory for Saruman either. Because he retreated from Helm's Deep and because he wouldn't have been at Minas Tirith, Gandalf would still be on the loose. And Gandalf is exactly the kind of person the Free Peoples would need at this point. someone who can ride around on his horse Ferrari, gathering the weary and defeated forces of Gondor and Rohan and inspiring them to make counterattacks of their own. With Mordor's forces scattered and leaderless and Isengard's forces trapped and without a base, there's a very real chance Gondor and Rohan could turn the war around, or at least stalemate it, even if Minas Tirith has fallen, and even if characters like Denethor, Aragorn and Theoden are dead. There are still capable leaders in both realms: Elfhelm, Erkenbrand, Eowyn and Grimbold in Rohan, Angbor and the three sons of Prince Imrahil in Gondor. Even with all the devastation, victory could still be salvaged. Alternatively, it could be time for a Black Númenórean such as the Mouth of Sauron, or an Easterling or Haradrim chieftain to step up and complete what their ancestors were attempting for millennia, the conquest of the Westlands of Middle-earth. Although Sauron's forces would descend into chaos, a leader with an iron will would be able to gather a decent-sized army made up of those individuals who weren't so easily cowed by their master's defeat. They would still have the numbers advantage, they have the Black Fleet of the Corsairs, and they have already overcome Gondor's strongest fortress. Sauron may not live to witness the conquest of Gondor and Rohan, but one of his lieutenants could still ensure it would become a reality. Honestly, this sounds like a good starting place for a fantastic fanfiction story, detailing events as each of these three weakened sides all continue to vie for victory. Or if a full fanfiction is too much, just let me know in the comments below about what you believe would happen and who might win in this chaotic scenario. But going back to the original topic, we can come to an understanding of Saruman's position. Win or lose at Helm's Deep, he was already in deep trouble. The One Ring was his victory condition, and in an effort to obtain it, he had betrayed both Sauron and the Free Peoples. With his gambit having failed, Saruman had no choice but to play along as Sauron's ally, and hope that he could salvage something from the war, whether it was his own domain or perhaps mercy from the big guy. In saying that, even with Saruman having such a minimal chance of true victory for himself in the War of the Ring, his actions still played a huge role in the conflict, and a victory for Isengard at Helm's Deep could have changed the world forever. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. What if scenarios are always fun to think about, especially when they lead to all sorts of wacky or unthinkable outcomes. If you have any suggestions for future what if videos, please let me know, and don't forget to tell me what you thought of the chaos scenario in the comments. Cheers, thanks again, and remember, for Saruman, finishing second place just meant that he would have been the first loser.